What's up, dudes? HW here. I had something really cool happen today, and so I want to share it with you. So, quick story time. These are two of my Marshalls. I've had these for several years now. This is, I believe, a 71 or 72 Super Lead, and this is 74-ish Super Bass. It might be a 73. I'm really not sure. I had them in Carter's because I was going to sell them, but they kind of sat there. And some other stuff I brought into Carter's and put on consignment sold, and these did not sell. And I finally was just like, you know what? I don't want to sell those. I priced them pretty attractively, I thought, and they didn't sell. So I was like, you know what? This is a sign. I'm supposed to just keep these amps, keep a bunch of my little Marshall collection together. So I called them up and I said, hey, I'm going to come get the amps. I got a couple offers. I got an offer, a couple offers for on the Super Bass, but I was just like, you know what? I'm going to keep it. So while I was in there, we were looking for the power cable, and we couldn't find it. The Super Lead on top has the old style power cable that Marshall used to use that nobody uses anymore. So long story short, we can't find it, and they say, oh, you know what it probably was? We dragged all the Marshalls into that room when Kirk Hammett played them all. And I was like, what? So it turns out, you may have seen this photo where Kirk Hammett bought this very rare 1959 black Gibson Les Paul from Carter's. Here's the guitar right here. And the story on the guitar is it's the only black burst. They call it the black burst because it's the only factory black 1959 Gibson Les Paul with a factory Bigsby. And the guitar was custom ordered through Sam Ash in Hempstead, New York. And it had been with the original family until now. They brought it to Carter's. So Kirk Hammett, who I'm guessing because I think the times line up, he may have been in town to promote the whole greenie thing. You know, Gibson did all these greenie Les Pauls where they measured the guitars and then they made a bunch of greenie Les Pauls. And rumor has it you can buy one of those for 50 grand, which is pretty insane. That's at least what I heard on the internet. So take that with a grain of salt. I don't think Gibson's actually saying what they're selling those greenie Les Pauls for. And I think they only made 50 or 100. Anyway, long story short, turns out, little bit of the backstory here, Kirk Hammett actually tried to buy this guitar years and years ago. This guitar was apparently cataloged on, I think, Vintage Guitar Magazine's cover. Kirk Hammett had tried to buy it, and something happened where the dealer who was going to sell to him was kind of shady, and he could never get his hands on the actual guitar. So I guess he had wanted it, and then maybe he lost track of it or whatever. But the family, the original owner, still owned it. So when he saw that Carter's had it, you know, he had to go buy it. So I'm not gonna, I don't know what he paid for the guitar, you know, but it probably was a lot of money. I don't know if that information's out there. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I would imagine it's a very expensive guitar, you know, the Blackburst, and the pickup Zebra. Look at that. I mean, that's just sick, right? So anyway, a couple of the guys I know at Carter's over there, yeah, were just saying they dragged the Marshalls in, and I was like, what? He played the amps? And they said, yeah, well, we dragged all the Marshalls in there, and you know, he had played the guitar through like a wall of Marshalls. You know, he came out to buy the guitars, big deal kind of thing. And so I think they had these two and maybe 3 or 4 other, you know, vintage Marshalls in there. So I think they just plugged them all in together, had like a big wall of Marshalls. Kirk played them, and anyway, I think that's super cool that he just came in and played both of my Marshalls. Now, fun fact, that's not the only famous person who has played one of my amps. Actually, not even one of my Marshalls. Because you may not know this, but if you follow the channel, you know that I own this, my Purple Plexi. And now this amp is, of course, world famous for being HW's Purple Plexi, you know. But true story, this Purple Plexi is actually kind of famous in its own right before I owned it, because this Purple Plexi, it's a 50-watt 1968, and it actually used to belong to Aspen Pittman, who's founded Groove Tubes, and who at one point, and I think still today holds the record for having the largest tube amp collection ever assembled. Aspen Pittman had so many amps. And Aspen Pittman, by the way, Groove Tubes was the guy who invented matching tubes. If you can believe it, so many of guitar's famous recordings, influential albums, influential amps, tons of huge artists in the 60s and into some of the early 70s, they didn't even match tubes. Like, so just think of that. If you're trying to get like Hendrix's sound, just know that the tubes probably weren't even matched that closely to each other. They just didn't do it. Now, you might say they didn't need to match them because tubes were higher quality, and but they still would have been mismatched, you know? So maybe the tolerances were just real tight, and so now the tolerances are looser, and you need to match them together. I think some of that is true, but it's interesting, right? So not only did this belong to Aspen Pittman, but I purchased it through a shop who told me this story. Now, this is completely unverifiable, but it is probably the coolest story that could belong to a Marshall amp like this. Basically, Aspen Pittman owned the amp, and Aspen knew a lot of famous people and a lot of studio guys. He knew a lot of people in the industry. And after Aspen Pittman died, the amp had been sold to a collector who bought several amps from the Aspen Pittman collection. And that guy owned so many amps. He was like a big car dealer in Florida. He owned so many amps. They filled up his house. When he bought a new house, he kept the old house and just kept tube amps in it and kept it as like a bachelor pad music play area, right? So, okay. But when it got sold from Aspen Pittman to this collector in the middle, and then I bought it on consignment from the collector through a shop, the story that went along with it was the collector said that he had been told, and why he bought it out of the Aspen Pittman collection, was that this amp was one of several Marshalls that had been loaned to the studio for Appetite for Destruction. So they were unable to say what amps were used. They were unable to say if the amp was used at all. But all they knew was that at the time Appetite for Destruction was being recorded, this amp, along with several other amps belonging to Aspen Pittman, were loaned to the studio. And the studio then supplied those amps to artists, including Guns N' Roses, Slash, Dizzy, everybody. Like, so we don't know, right? Is this Slash's amp? No, it's not. Could it have been used on an overdub? Could it have been used on anything? I don't know. You don't know. And but it's a cool story, you know. And even if it's a Marshall that was just in the studio, in the building, not even in their studio, maybe in the studio next door, just the fact that it was there when that record that has such iconic Marshall tones was made. I know in the comments, Slash played the 2555L, blah, blah, blah. I know that. But who knows? Who knows who used what on what overdubs and stuff. And so I always like to think that amp was there for some famous stuff in history, and now it's part of my collection. And so many of you guys play tone-matched IRs on the Helix. You play Kemper profiles of that on Quad Cortex Cloud right now. If it says 68 Purple Plexi, that's my 68 Purple Plexi. That amp was there, and soon for Tonex. So I thought that was a really cool story. Kirk played these. The Purple Plexi was in the building, so they say. I can't prove it. Maybe it's the intro to one of those songs. I don't know. It's fun to imagine, right? Fun stories. And guitar is kind of a lot about the stories sometimes, you know? HW. Out. See you dudes.